As twilight settles over the medieval countryside, imagine walking through landscapes where every wooden post tells a story of community, tradition, and careful craftsmanship. Tonight, we'll explore the quiet art of medieval fence post installation, a practice that shaped the boundaries of rural life across Northern Europe for centuries. Picture yourself in a time when the placement of a single wooden post required weeks of planning, seasonal timing, and often the help of an entire village. These simple markers did far more than separate one field from another. They wove together the very fabric of medieval society. Our journey begins in the aftermath of the Roman Empire, when the structured stone boundary markers of Roman times gradually gave way to something more organic and adaptable. The Romans had left behind a legacy of precise surveying and permanent stone posts. But as their influence waned, medieval communities developed their own approaches to marking territory. Picture the transformation happening slowly over generations, as wooden posts began appearing alongside crumbling Roman stones. These early medieval fence makers weren't simply replacing one system with another. They were creating something entirely new, something that reflected their deep understanding of local materials and seasonal rhythms. The transition wasn't sudden or uniform. In some regions, you might have found Roman stone markers standing sentinel beside freshly installed wooden posts for decades, creating a fascinating blend of old and new. Medieval communities often incorporated Roman boundary stones into their new fencing systems, using them as anchor points for wooden rail fences. This gradual evolution reflects the practical wisdom of people who understood that change, like the seasons themselves, happens in its own time. Now let us turn to one of the most crucial decisions any medieval fence builder faced: the selection of wood. Imagine yourself standing in a medieval forest surrounded by towering trees, each species offering its own unique properties. Oak reigned supreme among fence post materials, and for good reason. Its dense grain and natural tannins created a wood that could withstand decades of exposure to soil moisture and changing weather. A well-installed oak post might serve faithfully for 15 to 20 years, long enough for a young farmer to see his children grown and married. But oak wasn't always available or affordable for every farmer. Picture a medieval woodsman carefully examining different trees, running his hands along the bark, checking for signs of disease or insect damage. Ash wood provided excellent strength and flexibility, making it ideal for posts that needed to withstand strong winds. Chestnut, where available, offered remarkable rot resistance, sometimes outlasting even oak in certain soil conditions. The choice of wood wasn't just practical. It reflected a deep knowledge of local forest resources passed down through generations. The preparation of these wooden posts required patience and skill that modern builders might find remarkable. Picture a medieval carpenter slowly charring the base of a fence post over glowing coals, the wood crackling and hissing as the flames created a protective carbon layer. This ancient technique, which some scholars believe may have been more widespread than initially thought, served as nature's own preservative. The charred layer sealed the wood fibers against moisture and created a barrier that insects found difficult to penetrate. Imagine the careful attention to detail as workers shaped each post by hand, using simple tools that had changed little for centuries. The top would be cut at an angle to shed rainwater, while the base would be pointed or shaped to ease installation. Every cut, every angle reflected generations of accumulated wisdom about how wood behaves in different conditions. The timing of fence post installation followed rhythms as old as agriculture itself. Picture the medieval farming calendar with its careful balance of planting, tending, and harvesting. Autumn emerged as the preferred season for setting posts, and the reasons reveal the deep understanding these farmers had of soil conditions and weather patterns. After the harvest was complete, the ground remained soft enough to dig. Yet the approaching winter would allow the earth to settle and freeze around the posts, creating a firm foundation. Imagine a crisp October morning, with mist rising from freshly turned fields. The soil holds just enough moisture from autumn rains to pack well around wooden posts, but it's not so wet that it becomes unworkable mud. Medieval farmers understood that posts installed in spring might loosen during the wet season, while summer installation often meant battling hard, dry soil with primitive tools. The autumn timing represented a perfect balance between workability and stability. This seasonal approach also aligned beautifully with the natural rhythms of community life. After the intense activity of harvest, there was time for the kind of careful, methodical work that good fence installation required. Picture entire families working together in the golden light of shorter days, taking advantage of this peaceful interval before winter's arrival. The actual techniques of digging and setting posts reveal the ingenuity of medieval craftsmen working with simple tools. Imagine holding a medieval wooden spade, its blade reinforced with strips of iron, feeling the weight and balance that generations of use had perfected. These tools, along with iron-tipped digging sticks, were the primary implements for creating post holes. The work was methodical and rhythmic. Drive the spade into the earth, rock it back and forth to loosen the soil, lift out the dirt, repeat. Picture the careful attention to proportions that guided this work. Medieval builders followed a rule of thumb that has stood the test of time. The underground portion of a fence post should equal, roughly, 1/3 of its above-ground height. A 6-foot post would require a 2-foot hole, creating the stable foundation necessary for long-term durability. This wasn't arbitrary. It reflected countless generations of experience with how deeply posts needed to be set to withstand frost heave, soil settling, and the constant pressure of wind and weather. The hole itself was typically dug slightly wider than the post at the top, tapering to a snug fit at the bottom. This shape, sometimes called a bell hole, allowed workers to pack earth firmly around the post while ensuring good drainage. Imagine the satisfying thud of a wooden tamping stick as workers compress layers of soil around each newly set post, creating the solid foundation that would support rails and boards for years to come. Now picture one of the most heartwarming aspects of medieval fence installation: the tradition of community work parties known as fencing bees. These gatherings transformed what might have been solitary, backbreaking labor into social events that strengthened neighborhood bonds. Imagine the scene on a crisp autumn morning as neighbors arrive with their tools, ready to help a fellow farmer establish new boundaries or repair old ones. The organization of these work parties reflected the deep, reciprocal nature of medieval rural life. Picture families keeping careful mental records of who had helped whom, understanding that today's assistance would be repaid when their own fencing needs arose. Children learned by watching and gradually taking on simple tasks, while older members of the community contributed their knowledge and experience, even when they could no longer handle heavy physical work. These gatherings often concluded with shared meals, creating a festive atmosphere around what might otherwise have been mundane labor. Imagine the warmth of a farmhouse kitchen as workers gathered to share bread, cheese, and ale, discussing not just the day's work, but community news, weather patterns, and plans for the coming seasons. Fencing bees represented medieval society at its most cooperative and communal. The legal frameworks surrounding fence installation reveal another fascinating layer of medieval life. Boundary disputes were so common that many villages appointed official fence viewers to inspect installations and mediate conflicts. Picture these respected community members walking carefully along property lines, examining post placement, checking measurements, and listening patiently to the concerns of neighboring landowners. These fence viewers possessed detailed knowledge of local customs and legal precedents regarding boundary establishment. Imagine the careful deliberation required when posts were installed in disputed areas, or when new fencing changed long-established property lines. The fence viewers' decision carried real weight in the community, and their role reflects the importance medieval society placed on maintaining harmonious relationships between neighbors. The legal aspects extended beyond simple dispute resolution. Many regions had specific requirements about post spacing, height, and materials, particularly where property boundaries adjoined common lands or roadways. Picture the complexity of medieval land law, where customary practices often carried as much weight as written statutes, and where the memory of elderly residents might serve as the final authority on disputed boundaries. Medieval communities across Northern Europe developed distinctly different approaches to fence post installation, each adapted to local conditions and materials. In Scandinavia, where rocky soil presented unique challenges, builders often set their posts in small stone cairns. Picture these carefully constructed stone foundations, with each rock selected and placed to provide maximum stability for the wooden post rising from the center. This Scandinavian technique offered several advantages beyond mere stability. The stones provided excellent drainage, preventing water from pooling around the post base where it might cause rot. They also created thermal mass that helped moderate temperature changes around the post, reducing the stress of freeze-thaw cycles. Imagine the satisfaction of a medieval Scandinavian farmer, knowing that his posts were anchored not just in earth, but in foundations of stone that might outlast the wood itself. In England, where clay soils were common, builders developed different strategies. Picture English farmers digging deeper holes and using different backfill techniques to account for soil that might expand and contract with seasonal moisture changes. They often mixed gravel or small stones into the clay backfill, creating better drainage and reducing the risk of frost heave. The forests of Germany influenced yet another regional variation, where abundant timber allowed for more elaborate post designs. German builders sometimes created posts with flared bases, carved directly from single pieces of wood, providing additional stability without the need for stone foundations. As we consider the broader context, picture how fence post installation connected to the great agricultural movements of medieval times. The establishment of permanent boundaries was closely linked to the gradual enclosure of common lands, a process that would reshape European agriculture over several centuries. Each fence post represented not just a property marker, but a step in the transformation from communal to individual land management. The skill and knowledge required for proper fence installation meant that experienced post setters were valued members of their communities. Picture these craftsmen traveling from farm to farm, carrying their specialized knowledge of soil conditions, wood selection, and installation techniques. Their expertise represented a crucial link in the chain of agricultural development, helping to establish the permanent field boundaries that would support more intensive farming methods. Imagine the long-term impact of these seemingly simple installations. A fence line established in the medieval period might influence land use patterns for centuries, with some boundaries surviving in recognizable form even today. The care and thought that went into each installation echoed forward through time, shaping landscapes in ways that medieval farmers could hardly have imagined. The measurement and spacing of fence posts reveals another layer of medieval practical wisdom. Picture a master fence builder pacing along a proposed fence line, using his own body as a measuring tool in an age before standardized rulers were common. The most typical spacing between posts was approximately 12 feet, often measured as 2 rod lengths, using the traditional measuring rod carried by many craftsmen. The spacing wasn't arbitrary. It reflected the optimal balance between material costs and structural integrity. Posts set too close together wasted precious wood resources, while posts spaced too far apart couldn't adequately support the rails and boards that would complete the fence. Imagine the accumulated experience that led to this practical standard, refined over generations of trial and observation. The use of body-based measurements also ensured consistency within individual projects, even when different workers were involved. A fence line measured by rod lengths would maintain uniform spacing, regardless of who did the actual pacing, providing the kind of practical standardization that medieval communities needed. Picture the tools these medieval craftsmen developed for their specialized work. Beyond the basic spades and digging sticks, experienced post setters often carried wooden measuring rods, marking stakes, and simple levels made from weighted strings. A post setter's toolkit might include specialized stamping tools for compacting soil, wedges for adjusting post alignment, and even primitive plumb bobs for ensuring vertical installation. These tools were often handmade by the craftsmen themselves, shaped and refined through years of use. Imagine the intimate relationship between worker and tool, where every handle was worn smooth by familiar hands and every cutting edge was maintained with careful attention. The loss or breakage of a favorite tool represented not just inconvenience, but the interruption of a working relationship developed over many seasons. The simplicity of these tools shouldn't mask their effectiveness. Medieval post setters achieved results that compared favorably with modern installations, creating foundations that lasted for decades, using nothing more sophisticated than wooden spades and iron-pointed digging sticks. Their success lay not in advanced technology, but in deep knowledge of materials, soil conditions, and time-tested techniques. As our journey through medieval fence post installation draws to a close, Picture the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. Imagine a medieval farmer standing at dusk, looking along a newly completed fence line, seeing posts standing straight and true, ready to support the rails and boards that would define his property for years to come. Each post represents hours of careful work. The selection of proper wood, the patient preparation, the methodical digging and setting, the community cooperation that made the work possible. These simple wooden markers carried meanings far beyond their practical function. They represented security, community cooperation, legal recognition, and the deep human need to define and protect the spaces where life unfolds. In their installation, we see reflected the values and wisdom of a society that understood the importance of careful, patient work, done in harmony with natural rhythms and community needs. The techniques developed by medieval fence builders influenced construction methods for centuries, with many principles still recognized by modern builders. Their understanding of wood preservation, soil conditions, and structural requirements represents a form of practical science developed through careful observation and passed down through generations of craftsmen. As we rest tonight, we might reflect on the enduring lessons of medieval fence post installation, the value of seasonal timing, the importance of community cooperation, the wisdom of working with natural materials, and the satisfaction that comes from patient, careful craftsmanship. In our modern age of rapid construction and synthetic materials, there's something deeply comforting about these ancient techniques that connected human skill with natural rhythms in the creation of lasting functional beauty. Sleep well, knowing that somewhere in the European countryside, medieval fence posts still stand, silent witnesses to the enduring power of thoughtful, skillful work.